Marcus Licinius Crassus is a central figure in the history of the Roman Republic, known for his immense wealth, but also for his humiliating defeat at the Battle of Carrhae. But how did Crassus become the richest man in Rome? And why was his defeat against the Parthians so humiliating? Stay with me in this video as we uncover the full story of the man who became known as the richest in Rome. Crassus was born in 115 before Christ into one of the oldest and most prominent families of Rome. The Licinian gens was a patrician family with great prestige, and Crassus grew up surrounded by a tradition of power and political influence. His father, Publius Licinius Crassus, was a consul and censor, which ensured Crassus an aristocratic education and an early introduction to politics and the power struggles of Rome. Crassus grew up in a transforming Rome, marked by the conflict between two political factions, the Populares, who advocated for plebeian rights and land reforms, and the Optimates, who represented the interests of the senatorial aristocracy. This political struggle led to one of the most turbulent periods in the history of the Roman Republic, the civil wars between Marius and Sulla. This war would directly affect Crassus and his family. In 87 BC, when Crassus was around 28 years old, this conflict reached its peak, with Gaius Marius and his ally seizing control of Rome by force. Crassus's father, who supported the rival Optimates faction, was captured and executed during the political purges that followed Marius's victory. His brother was also killed, and the family's properties were confiscated. Forced to flee for his life, Marcus Licinius Crassus escaped from Rome and found refuge in what is now Spain, where his family still owned land. This period of exile was a moment of crisis and transformation for Crassus. While in Spain, he began building a network of local allies and rebuilding his fortune. He managed to gather troops and establish a power base, taking advantage of the properties his family still held in the region. When General Lucius Cornelius Sulla returned to Italy in 83 BC after his voluntary exile, he began his march on Rome to reclaim control of the Republic, and Crassus immediately joined him and his forces. Crassus knew that supporting Sulla, who was determined to crush Marius's followers, offered the best opportunity to restore his social and political standing in Rome. Upon returning to the city with Sulla's forces, Crassus recovered his family's properties and began rebuilding his fortune. With Sulla's victory and his consolidation of power as dictator, a process known as the proscriptions began, a list of political enemies who were declared traitors and had their properties confiscated. Sulla used the proscriptions as a way to eliminate his opponents and reward his allies, and Crassus was one of the main beneficiaries of this process. During the proscriptions, he took advantage of the opportunity to significantly expand his wealth. Crassus bought confiscated properties from the proscribed at extremely low prices, often acquiring entire estates, especially in Rome, greatly increasing his assets. Through this strategy, Crassus became one of the wealthiest men in Rome. His alliance with Sulla not only provided him with a promising military career, but also placed him in a position of immense economic power. Additionally, Crassus implemented a peculiar method of making money through the fire brigade he personally created. Whenever a fire broke out in Rome, he would send his men to negotiate the purchase of the threatened properties. If the owners agreed to sell, Crassus would put out the fire, but if they refused, he would let the building burn. In 72 BC, the slave revolt led by Spartacus was growing in size and strength, and at that moment, the Roman Senate became desperate for a solution. By this time, Spartacus and his followers had already defeated several Roman legions and were moving north toward the Alps, intending to escape the Italian peninsula. It was at this point that the Senate appointed Crassus as the supreme commander of the campaign against the rebels. With a reputation for cunning and military discipline, Crassus accepted the challenge, knowing that a victory over Spartacus could solidify his political standing. He took command of approximately 40,000 soldiers, reorganizing his legions and imposing strict discipline. Crassus was known for his brutal tactics, and one of his first measures was to revive the practice of decimation. an ancient disciplinary method in which 1 out of every 10 soldiers from a unit that deserted or showed cowardice was executed. Though unpopular, this measure restored discipline among his troops, who had been shaken by previous defeats. After that, Crassus adopted a meticulous and cautious approach. He knew that Spartacus was a clever leader and that engaging in direct confrontation without proper planning could result in another humiliating defeat. Instead, Crassus decided to encircle the rebel army and cut off its supplies. As Spartacus and his followers retreated south, Crassus built a line of fortifications, a sort of wall along the Isthmus of Catanzaro, blocking the slaves' path north and trapping them in the region. Spartacus attempted to break through Crassus's defenses multiple times, but his efforts failed, and starvation began to weaken the rebel forces. Over time, the rebels became fragmented, and while some attempted to flee, Spartacus gathered the remaining forces for one final confrontation with Crassus. In 71 BC, the decisive battle took place near the Salaro River in southern Italy. Although Spartacus fought bravely and led his men from the front lines, the rebel army was completely crushed by the Roman legions. Spartacus was killed in battle, though his body was never found. Following his victory over Spartacus, Crassus decided to send a clear message to anyone who might consider challenging Rome again. He ordered the crucifixion of approximately 6,000 surviving slaves along the Appian Way, the main road connecting Rome to southern Italy. After his overwhelming victory over Spartacus and his rise as one of the wealthiest and most influential men in Rome, Crassus faced a new challenge: competing politically with the other giants of the Republic. One of Crassus's greatest rivals was Pompey the Great, who served as consul alongside him in 70 BC. Despite both holding consulship, they had vastly different visions and personalities. Crassus was less popular among soldiers and the Roman people compared to Pompey, who enjoyed great military prestige due to his victories against the pirates and in Spain. This difference in popularity created a rivalry between them, even as they were forced to share political power. Despite this competition, Crassus realized that he needed strategic alliances to remain relevant. At the time, Julius Caesar was a rising young politician, emerging as an increasingly powerful force in Rome. Caesar was returning from his campaigns in Spain and possessed both the charisma and popular support that Crassus and Pompey needed for their own interests. Of course, Caesar also knew that he would need Crassus's financial backing and Pompey's military influence to achieve his political goals. Thus, in 60 BC, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar formed an informal agreement that later became known as the First Triumvirate. This political pact was not officially sanctioned by the Senate, but functioned as a strategic alliance among the three leaders, allowing them to manipulate political decisions in Rome. Crassus financed many of Caesar's political activities, while Pompey provided military support. In return, Caesar used his persuasive power and charisma to ensure that the interests of Crassus and Pompey were met in the Senate. For Crassus, the First Triumvirate was an opportunity to protect and expand his influence. The alliance provided him with the necessary support to push his economic and political agenda despite Senate opposition. One of Crassus's most significant achievements during this period was renegotiating tax collection contracts in the eastern provinces, which directly benefited his vast fortune. Crassus had major investments in tax collection companies, and securing more favorable conditions for these companies was both a personal and financial victory. Moreover, the support of Caesar and Pompey gave Crassus a counterbalance against the Optimates in the Senate, who still viewed his ambitions with suspicion. Although he lacked Pompey's military prestige or Caesar's charisma, Crassus used his wealth and political influence to ensure that his opinions were heard and respected. One example of this occurred in 59 BC when Caesar was elected consul. During his term, he passed a series of agrarian and economic reforms that benefited both Crassus and Pompey. These legislative acts strengthened the triumvirate and further cemented the three leaders' control over Rome's political machinery. However, despite being a powerful alliance, the triumvirate began to show signs of tension. Crassus and Pompey, though temporarily united, never fully overcame their rivalry. Pompey had great military prestige and was widely popular among the people, whereas Crassus was always seen as the financial backbone of the alliance, lacking the same military glories as his partners. Additionally, Julius Caesar's growing power began to threaten the positions of both Crassus and Pompey within the alliance. In 56 BC, the three leaders met in the city of Lucca to renegotiate their alliance. During this meeting, Crassus and Pompey secured a new term as consuls for the year 55 BC. Caesar, in turn, had his command over the Gallic campaigns extended, allowing him to further consolidate his military power. Yet, despite having amassed immense wealth and established a powerful political alliance, Crassus always resented his lack of military achievements comparable to those of Caesar and Pompey. He longed for a great military victory that could rival the achievements of his allies, leading him to embark on an ambitious yet disastrous campaign against the Parthian Empire. At that time, the Parthian Empire was a wealthy and influential Eastern power, seen as an attractive target both for the prestige a victory would bring and for the riches that could be plundered. Crassus believed that defeating the Parthians would solidify his position as one of Rome's greatest military leaders and balance his rivalry with Pompey and Caesar. However, from the beginning, many in Rome viewed this campaign with suspicion. Crassus had a long history of ambition for wealth, and many of his close associates considered the campaign driven more by greed than by genuine strategic interests for Rome. The renowned orator and senator Marcus Tullius Cicero openly criticized Crassus, arguing that his pursuit of glory and riches blinded him to the dangers of war with the Parthians, an enemy highly capable and whose military tactics were unfamiliar to the Romans. Yet, this was not enough to deter Crassus. In 55 BC, he was appointed governor of the province of Syria, which served as a base for his campaign against the Parthian Empire. From there, he gathered an army of 7 legions, totaling around 50,000 soldiers, including a large contingent of Gallic cavalry and auxiliary troops. Confident in his numerical superiority and the discipline of the Roman legions, Crassus set out toward Parthian territory, believing his forces would easily prevail over the eastern armies. However, Crassus underestimated his enemy. As he marched eastward, the Parthian king Orodes II prepared his defenses and, more importantly, mobilized an army under the command of General Surena, a skilled military leader who would use innovative and decisive tactics against the Romans. When Crassus crossed the Euphrates River, he encountered the Parthian army, which, although numerically inferior, had 2 major advantages. First, the heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, protected by armor, and second, the mounted archers, who mastered the technique of shooting arrows while riding, retreating at high speed. This combination proved devastating against Crassus's legions. General Surena, familiar with Roman battle tactics and taking advantage of the desert terrain, employed a strategy of maneuver warfare. The Parthian archers, mounted on swift horses, unleashed a relentless barrage of arrows on the Roman legions, always staying out of reach of the Roman infantry formations. The cataphracts, in turn, launched devastating attacks on the Roman formations, easily destroying them. Crassus, faced with this unfamiliar combat tactic, could not adapt his forces to confront the enemy. The Roman army was cornered, and the soldiers, exhausted and without supplies, began to fall into disorder. With every attempt to advance, the Romans were massacred by the Parthian archers, who continued to attack from a distance, giving no chance for a response. During the battle, Crassus's eldest son, Publius Licinius Crassus, who commanded the Roman cavalry, made a desperate charge to break the enemy lines. However, he and his unit were surrounded and annihilated. Publius's death was a devastating blow to Crassus, both emotionally and militarily. The morale of the Roman army quickly collapsed, and the legions, surrounded and with no way out, were decimated. Out of the 50,000 Roman soldiers, over 30,000 were killed or captured. After the catastrophic defeat at Carrhae, Crassus attempted to negotiate an agreement with Serena to save what remained of his army. However, during the negotiations, he was betrayed and murdered by the Parthians. According to some historical sources, such as the historian Plutarch, the Parthians mocked Crassus after his death by pouring molten gold into his mouth, symbolizing his insatiable greed for wealth that had led to his destruction. Crassus's death at Carrhae had profound repercussions for Roman politics. The first triumvirate, which had been maintained in balance by Crassus's power, began to crumble. Without Crassus to mediate the rivalry between Caesar and Pompey, the tension between the two increased exponentially. While Caesar consolidated his power in Gaul, Pompey was appointed the sole consul in Rome, increasing his control over the institutions of the Republic, something that would result in a great civil war. Above all, Crassus's death was a humiliating blow to Rome. Not only did it lose thousands of soldiers, but it also caused a great blow to Rome's prestige, which had previously believed in the invincibility of its legions. The Parthian campaign, which should have brought the glory and wealth that Crassus so desired, became one of the most bitter and disgraceful defeats in Roman military history. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching until the end, and I'll see you in the next video.